Hey, I'm bringing about 10 colleagues back for an after party, so get things ready, okay? He said casually. Just because you're in your final month of pregnancy doesn't mean you can't handle that much, right? And make sure there are some desserts the ladies will enjoy. Exhausted from caring for our energetic 2-year-old twins and navigating the challenges of my final month of pregnancy, my body felt stretched to its limits. My husband, who often left childcare responsibilities to me, grew frustrated when I hesitated due to the short notice. Despite my fatigue, I reluctantly began preparations, eventually lying down in the nursery to settle the twins for the night. Hours later, one of the intoxicated colleagues stumbled into the nursery, shocked to discover our family scene. "I had no idea you had young children and a pregnant wife. Did you forget to mention it?" he slurred, raising his voice towards my husband. With a single comment from my husband, what had started as a light-hearted after-party swiftly descended into chaos. I had married my husband at the age of 28 after a whirlwind romance, rushing into marriage within months. Initially, I juggled my job while he harbored dreams of me becoming a full-time homemaker. Despite not actively planning for children, we enjoyed our newlywed bliss for the first year. My pregnancy arrived just before my 30th birthday, prompting me to resign from my job as agreed, embracing my role as a homemaker. Excitement filled my husband as he shared news of our growing family with everyone he met. When the news of twins and the risks of a first pregnancy arose, doctors recommended a managed hospital stay. My husband, fearing complications, readily agreed, though concerns lingered about the state of our home as his domestic skills were limited. Fortunately, my in-laws stepped in with a solution. We debated between regular visits for my mother-in-law or my husband staying with them until my discharge. He chose the latter option. After safely delivering the twins via C-section, my discharge from the hospital was a joyful affair, celebrated with my husband, in-laws, and parents by my side. Nurses commented on our apparent happiness as we returned home. However, once we settled back into our house, my husband's demeanor shifted. "Feels good to be back in our own space, away from half of my mom's nagging," he joked, catching me off guard. Expecting our parents to stay longer, they surprised us by suggesting we have some private family time. My in-laws returned home, and my parents went back to their hotel. Juggling the twins and luggage, my husband complained of a sore shoulder and left me to manage. He briefly held one of the babies but soon placed them on the sofa, asking for tea. "Let's set up the baby's sleeping area first," I suggested through discomfort, arranging a spot for them. This marked the beginning of my husband's disinterest in parenting. The following day, my parents arrived early, prioritizing the twins above all else, a lesson from experience. I focused on caring for the twins and my husband, often neglecting my own needs. Around noon, my in-laws returned, having witnessed my mother's efforts and grasped the demands of twin care. From then on, we tackled parenting together, with both sets of grandparents pitching in. While my father-in-law and father maintained their work commitments, my mother-in-law and mother provided support during the weekdays. Living out of state, my parents' visits were limited, so we heavily relied on my in-laws, who adored the twins and never judged my parenting skills. Their reassurances and encouragement to take things at my own pace were invaluable. Men may initially struggle with childcare, but once they take the first step, they find it fulfilling, my father-in-law shared from his own experience, acknowledging the initial hesitance and fear of failure. Reflecting on his own early parenting days, my father recounted his nervousness when he first took care of me. Despite these anecdotes, my husband remained disengaged, responding with mere nods or brief comments. As time passed and my parents' visits became less frequent, my husband's attitude deteriorated, testing my in-laws' patience. He often complained about being hungry and demanded freshly cooked meals while I juggled breastfeeding and household chores, criticizing any reliance on convenience foods. "It's not like I rely on ready meals all the time," he defended himself, yet he seemed dissatisfied even if a single dish was pre-made, viewing it as a lapse in my homemaking duties. "You're not a child. If you're hungry, make something yourself. Babies can't feed themselves," I countered. Instead of demanding a cooked meal, why not suggest taking turns with breastfeeding and formula? Initially shocked by my in-laws scolding him, my husband retorted, "If I cook, what's left for a full-time homemaker to do? And if I breastfeed, what's left for a mother to do?" His response left us all astounded. Following this, my mother-in-law delivered a series of lectures on household responsibilities, while my father-in-law gave my husband basic childcare lessons. Reluctantly, he assisted, his demeanor sullen throughout. Over the next 2 years, until my third pregnancy, he used work as an excuse to avoid childcare. However, in the presence of my parents, excuses didn't suffice and he reluctantly participated, albeit grudgingly. During my second pregnancy, severe morning sickness plagued me again. Witnessing my discomfort, even my husband, who had become more engaged thanks to my in-laws' initial guidance, pitched in with more household chores and childcare. Gradually, though, he found excuses to avoid them. His dedication waned notably when he cooked a meal that didn't turn out well. Mistakes happen, I reassured him, trying to eat despite feeling unwell. However, he interpreted my inability to finish the meal as criticism of his cooking, feeling his efforts were futile. Once he started cutting corners, his commitment swiftly dwindled, lasting less than a month. Now, weekends are dedicated to his hobbies, and he often returns home late on weekdays due to work or social engagements. There were days we barely saw each other, I recalled. I asked him to come home earlier or spend at least one weekend day with us. I didn't need him to take care of me, I just wanted him to spend time with the twins. You've been parenting for 2 years now, so you must be used to it, right? And it's your second pregnancy, just one baby this time. There's nothing left for me to do, my husband claimed. With that, my husband left to indulge in his hobbies. Lately, the 2-year-old twins seemed more attuned to our moods. They picked up on my husband's distant tone and my expressions of disappointment. Unconsciously, I found myself sighing in frustration. Why did I choose to have a third child in this situation? I questioned myself relentlessly. Occasionally, my husband showed kindness toward me despite his lack of involvement in childcare. When he sought physical intimacy, it reassured me that he still cared, yet I'd often complied to avoid upsetting him and creating more issues. Reflecting on our situation, I realized it was a vicious cycle that brought us to where we were. It wasn't that I didn't want the baby growing inside me, I was genuinely happy about the pregnancy. But deep down, I felt it wasn't the right time. Feeling the baby move inside my swelling belly was both comforting and poignant. I would gently stroke my belly, apologizing for any perceived weakness and promising to grow stronger, urging the baby to arrive healthy. Like before, this birth would also be via C-section. As the due date approached, I needed to be hospitalized, and preparations were necessary. Most importantly, I relied on my husband's help to care for the twins during my hospital stay. While I couldn't ask him to take time off work, I hoped he could assist in the evenings. His response, however, shattered my hopes. Taking time off for my wife's childbirth is embarrassing. It makes me look like a pushover, he remarked, leaving me speechless. Before I could retort, he interrupted with a demand for dinner. Let's not dwell on that. The twins are 2 now. They can feed themselves when hungry, he insisted. Really? Then a grown man in his 30s should be more than capable of making his own meal. Why not set an example for the kids? I countered. I'm fine. My earnings keep this family going. You should be grateful and make me dinner as appreciation, he retorted, frustrating me further. As my pregnancy progressed, the strain on my back slowed my movements. He criticized my housework, calling it sluggish and lacking enthusiasm. Lately, his favorite refrain was, I'm the breadwinner of this family. It was he who insisted I become a homemaker once I became pregnant, despite my desire to continue working. I reluctantly agreed to my husband's insistence on me becoming a homemaker, though accepting his role as the sole provider was difficult. As my pregnancy reached the 36th week, my movements slowed and his criticisms grew harsher. His lack of consideration infuriated me, but fearing for my health, I held back from arguing and absorbed his unkind words. Approaching the 38th week and scheduled for a C-section, my husband questioned my decision. Why not reconsider the C-section? Twins were unavoidable last time, but with just one baby now, wouldn't a natural birth be more fulfilling? His misunderstanding left me exasperated. Choosing a C-section was about minimizing risks to both me and the baby, not avoiding housework as he implied. I patiently explained the medical risks, suggesting he consult with the doctor if my explanations weren't clear enough. Dismissing my concerns, he retorted, why should I take time from my schedule to learn about C-sections? I'm not the one giving birth. On the day of my hospital admission, I tried to reason with him to avoid further conflict, but he snapped, accusing me of being persistent. Amidst this tension, my husband unexpectedly called. He said he's bringing 10 colleagues home for an after-party and asked me to prepare food, especially desserts that women would enjoy. Before having children, he used to host such gatherings, and I had enjoyed the socializing despite it being primarily his colleagues. These gatherings had become less frequent since my pregnancy and even more so after the twins were born. It never happened after the twins were born, I recalled. It seemed his colleagues were considerate about our young twins needing constant attention. I couldn't fathom why suddenly they would decide to come over in such a large group now. I'm about to be hospitalized and labor could start any time. It's impossible for me to prepare a meal for guests at such short notice, I reasoned with my husband, feeling overwhelmed by the situation. I even suggested we host the after party elsewhere, even if it costs a bit more. My husband, known for his generosity and occasionally lavish gestures with colleagues, was insistent. You agreed we'd host it here. Are you trying to embarrass me? He snapped back angrily. He emphasized that a wife should support her husband's image and obey his decisions without question. Exhausted and lacking the energy to argue further, I reluctantly agreed to do as he said. With the time so late, shopping is out of the question. I'll have to make do with what we have and prepare a meal for 10. I resignedly told him, grateful I had stocked up on extra ingredients earlier. Yet this meant I would need to shop again tomorrow. As I cooked, my belly tightened with tension and worry crept in. Will I even be able to finish cooking? I wondered to myself. Following my husband's instructions, I retreated to a room with the twins once the preparations were done. While putting the twins to bed, the noise of my husband and his colleagues returning startled them awake. Silently urging them to be quiet, I managed to soothe them back to sleep. Relieved as I watched the twins peacefully asleep, a sharp pain gripped my belly. Struggling to suppress a cry, I covered my mouth with both hands, trying not to disturb anyone. The pain intensified, signaling a potentially serious situation. Suddenly, the door opened unexpectedly. Sorry, I thought this was the bathroom, slurred a colleague, clearly drunk. Inside the room were the sleeping twins and me, a pregnant woman barely holding back a groan of pain. I reassured him, please enjoy yourself. Don't worry about us, relying on our previous interactions to ease his concern. Stuttering an apology, he quickly left the room, leaving me alone with the twins, grappling with the pain and uncertainty. I heard my husband's voice from the living room, agitated and confrontational. Why did you leave your young kids and pregnant wife alone? Isn't she due soon? Confused by the sudden change in tone, I had assumed his colleagues were aware of our situation when they arrived. Their behavior had seemed considerate until now. Perhaps it was a joke amplified by alcohol, I thought, but my husband took it seriously, unable to back down once committed. However, from their conversation, it became clear that wasn't the case. His colleagues explained they had declined previous invitations because of our young children and my pregnancy. Feeling guilty for attending so late and unannounced, they hadn't realized we were at home. Why did this happen? One of them asked. Another mentioned hearing we were at my parents' place with my husband home alone. So, we didn't think it would be a problem, he added. Aware that 10 colleagues had unexpectedly arrived for an after-party, I had hidden away to avoid being seen. If you were seen, there's nothing we can do about it, one remarked dismissively. She always finds excuses like taking care of the twins or being pregnant to avoid household chores. My husband defended himself confidently, insisting I cook for 10 people late at night. Curious and concerned, I stepped out of the room. I worried about my husband's escalating anger, how he might act, especially at home where he sometimes behaved like a tyrant. Though I couldn't be certain if he was the type to act differently in public, I feared his next move. Peeking into the living room, I saw a colleague gripping my husband's shirt, trying to calm him down. Even the others, in varying degrees of inebriation, attempted to defuse the situation, arguing he was going too far. The colleague explained his frustration, causing those who had defended my husband to reconsider. Several colleagues, who themselves had children the twins' age, expressed disbelief and scorn toward my husband's behavior. Female colleagues condemned him, calling him the worst kind of husband, while voices suggested ending the gathering. Some began tidying up. As he was labeled the worst in both husbandry and fatherhood, my husband's arrogance faltered, leaving him unable to respond. Several colleagues noticed me and apologized for the disruption. Moving to a nearby sofa to alleviate the growing pain in my stomach, I realized the intervals were consistent. It was definitely labor. I called out to my husband, who stood silently under a barrage of scolding from his colleagues. But he didn't respond. One of them noticed my distress and asked if I needed to call the hospital. When I nodded, they handed me the cordless phone. With shaky hands, I dialed the hospital and was instructed to come in immediately. Thankfully, my hospital bag was ready in the bedroom. Struggling to get up, a kind female colleague offered to fetch it for me if I allowed her into the room, to which I gratefully agreed. Amid the late-night labor pains, my husband seemed utterly defeated. I debated whether to call my in-laws to take care of the twins. How many times had I wished we lived closer to my parents, who I could call without hesitation in such moments. If you're going to the hospital, go alone, and if you call for an ambulance, tell them not to use the siren, okay? We don't need the neighbors knowing, my husband muttered bitterly. You brought this upon yourself, so deal with it. His bitterness stemmed from his exposed lies causing this turmoil. I followed his earlier instructions, quietly sequestered in the room. Lies, especially poorly constructed ones, are bound to unravel, particularly those spun by men. I wanted to lash out in anger at his blame shifting, but the stress on my body forbade it. As I struggled to contain my emotions, a loud slap echoed through the room. I turned to see one of my husband's colleagues, someone I also knew, slapping him across the face in frustration. "I never thought you could be so heartless. Giving birth is a matter of life and death. And you hit me," I exclaimed, stunned by the situation unfolding before me. I've never been hit, not even by my own parents. The words felt surreal, as if I were hearing them in a movie rather than real life. My husband, visibly embarrassed and his face flushed red with wounded pride, seemed deeply humiliated. "Sorry for expecting empathy from someone who's never experienced pain like this," he retorted defensively. "The pain your wife is going through is beyond your comprehension. Why am I the one being blamed here? I'm the one supporting this family," he argued vehemently, shifting blame onto me for embarrassing him in public while shouting at the colleague who had slapped him, threatening legal action for assault. But his outburst fell on deaf ears. His colleagues dismissed his threats and turned their attention to me, asking how they could help. Amidst the commotion, the twins woke up, frightened by the unfamiliar faces and raised voices, and began crying. Overwhelmed by the situation, caring for myself, and now having to calm the twins, I felt a wave of frustration at my useless husband, who seemed more concerned with his pride than our immediate needs. Just as I contemplated calling my in-laws for help, a female colleague and another colleague with children stepped forward to care for the twins. Gratefully, I accepted their offer. The woman assured me she often cared for her nieces and nephews, while the man mentioned his own children were around the same age as the twins. I briefed them on the toys in the twins' room, any dietary considerations, and told them they were welcome to use whatever food was available in the house. I'd also planned to call my mother-in-law earlier than planned, letting her know about the situation. Some colleagues who had experience with childbirth suggested we take a taxi to the hospital for a quicker arrival. They tried to arrange one, but it would take some time. Then one colleague mentioned a subordinate who lived nearby and wasn't at the gathering. A father himself, he rushed over immediately after being called. His understanding wife had encouraged him to leave quickly, a gesture that touched me deeply, even if it might have been a fabricated excuse. Despite my husband's continued protests of his righteousness, both the colleague and I ignored him. The subordinate colleague drove me to the hospital, while the female colleague who had accompanied me assured she would stay until my in-laws or parents arrived. I thanked her profusely as she took charge, contacting my parents and in-laws on my behalf. Despite her own work commitments the next day, she insisted it was no trouble to stay until my in-laws arrived. The following morning, my parents, who lived out of state, arrived. They had missed the cesarean delivery but were relieved to find both me and the newborn safe. However, the true turmoil began once everything settled down. Upon learning that a female colleague had called them, both my parents and my in-laws suspected infidelity. They were eager to hear the details but rushed to the hospital first. After arriving and hearing the full story, they were shocked to discover that the situation was more serious than they had imagined. At the hospital, my in-laws assumed my husband was at home caring for the twins, feeling somewhat reassured that he was at least fulfilling his duties as a father. Little did they know, it was actually my colleagues who were looking after the twins while I had been forced to cook for 10 people while on the brink of giving birth. Apologies flowed from my in-laws to both my parents and me for my husband's misconduct. Recognizing the need for my parents' support, my in-laws swiftly departed to confront my husband. The scene they encountered at our home was disheartening. By the time they arrived, all but 2 of my husband's colleagues had left. The remaining 2 were busy caring for the twins and cleaning up after the party while my husband sulked in a corner, nursing a beer. My mother-in-law handed over some taxi fare and a small token of appreciation to the colleagues who stayed behind, expressing her gratitude and apologies. She understood that money couldn't fully rectify the situation, but it was the only immediate way she could convey her feelings. Later, my in-laws personally thanked each of the 10 colleagues who had been there. Alone with my husband, his parents, and the twins, my mother-in-law took the children for a walk, sparing them from witnessing their father being reprimanded. When they returned, my husband's cheek bore evidence of a solid blow from his father. Under his father's stern lecture, my husband looked utterly defeated, yet he stubbornly insisted that he had done nothing wrong. Throughout my recovery at home with our 3rd child, my husband showed no signs of change. In his parents' presence, he appeared compliant, but as soon as they left, he reverted to his old ways. Juggling our 2-year-old twins and the newborn, I had little respite, yet he continued to bark orders at me. He blamed me for being an inadequate wife, suggesting that his father's rebuke was somehow my fault. It became increasingly clear that he was becoming more than I could handle. I made the decision to divorce my husband and informed both my in-laws and my parents about it. My parents fully supported my choice, having already suggested I return to their house before I was discharged from the hospital. Disappointed in their son's behavior, my in-laws expressed no opposition and apologized for the trouble he had caused. My husband, however, strongly resisted the idea of divorce and did not agree right away. He sought advice from his colleagues at work, only to find that they were surprised I hadn't initiated the divorce sooner and actually supported my decision. In essence, my husband found himself abandoned by his colleagues. Rumors began swirling at his workplace about an incident that occurred during a home party he hosted. The exact details were unclear, but the day after the party, several colleagues, including my husband, were absent or arrived late to work. My in-laws even visited the company to apologize to those affected. Whatever my husband had done had clearly left an impression. Seeing both of his parents apologizing together left many wondering about the severity of his actions. Speculation spread throughout the office. Meanwhile, news of my safe delivery circulated among the 10 colleagues who attended the party. Some curious employees speculated that perhaps my delivery had triggered my husband's actions. While not entirely accurate, the rumor gained traction, and my husband found himself not only looked down upon by his colleagues but also by his subordinates. As his work performance suffered, he eventually decided to leave the job voluntarily. It was only then that he seemed to grasp the gravity of his situation. Initially agreeing to the divorce out of anger, he later regretted his decisions. After quitting his job and moving back in with his parents, he pleaded with me tearfully to reconsider, claiming our home was his sanctuary. However, by then, I had already moved on from that chapter of my life. I returned to my parents' home and focused on raising our children with their support. I had no time or inclination to dwell on a man I had decided to leave behind. In the meantime, my husband struggled to find new employment before eventually being kicked out of his parents' house with no savings and mounting financial obligations due to child support and alimony payments. Desperate, he turned to borrowing money from risky sources just to get by, plunging him into a cycle of debt and hardship. Now, he holds a difficult job with questionable lenders, barely earning enough to cover his daily expenses, which are quickly consumed by debt repayments. While I have moved forward with my life at my parents' home, I maintain contact with my ex-husband's former colleagues and his parents. The twins expressed a desire to reconnect with the older siblings who used to play with them, prompting me to reach out. At that time, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of colleagues would attend a party under such circumstances. Yet, to my surprise, apart from my husband, they proved to be remarkably empathetic and supportive individuals. I credit much of my present happiness to those 10 people. Some of them have since become close friends, and we now regularly connect on a family-to-family basis, sharing our experiences and challenges of parenthood. My in-laws showed me great kindness, and the twins grew quite attached to them. With my parents also maintaining a warm relationship with my in-laws, they visit frequently to spend time with the twins and our new baby. Through this entire ordeal, I've learned the true essence of mutual support in life. The gratitude I felt then remains with me, and I am determined to continue building a future filled with even greater happiness alongside my precious family.